Dear, wow.
Yeah,
Hare
Hanuman.
Krishna.
Hey.
Hare Krishna. Oh, the Hanuman behind the Hanuman. Hare Krishna. Jai. Jai Brajalila. I'm going to do a little kirtan while we're waiting for everybody.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Is that all right? Okay.
And if everybody could just mute themselves if they're not talking, that would help for the background noise, anything. Yeah.
Okay. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Shishodhanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Shishodhanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Tirada Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jashodha Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jashodha Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Jai Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bol Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishnaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Shunyavari Paschatya Rasatayane Panchakalpatrubhasya Kripa Shunyavyevaja Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Welcome. Nice to see you all. Nice to be here with you. My name is Mahatma Das. My tagline is, I'm an ordinary person who has an extraordinary guru. Anything good you see in me is only because I was smart enough after I met my guru, Srila Prabhupada, to not run away. That's my only redeeming quality. And I'm still here. I haven't run away. That's my quality. So the topic is called Don't Throw Shlokas at Emotional Problems. It's based on my experience of understanding a bit about what goes on in the hearts of devotees and seeing how often teachers do not understand what's going on and they have not made the proper diagnosis, so they're using their ordinary medicine, which normally works in normal situations. I'm going to tell some stories because it'll illustrate this. So this is a story from Uttama. One sannyasi was giving class, and the topic of grihastha life came up, and he said some things that were a little bit off, or maybe really off, I'm not sure. Some things she didn't like. So she went, if you know Uttama, she's, very sweet and very straightforward. And so she went up to the sannyasi and said, and the sannyasi was not a Prabhupada disciple, so she's like his mother in a sense. She said, Maharaj, what you said about grihastha life wasn't exactly right. And he said, what should I have said? And she said, you shouldn't have said anything, just don't talk about it, because you don't really know about it. So I think we all have experience of people talking about things they don't know about, don't we? Because you're the teacher, so you're supposed to talk about everything and answer every question. And it's not, I guess it's not PC for gurus to say, I actually don't know the answer to that. But I thought that was funny. And my next experience with this came when, I don't know how long ago it was, close to 20 years now. I fell into, by accident, a forgiveness process that really made me realize that I had been holding on to something that was really bad for me, and I didn't realize it till I let it go. And then I started thinking, there's probably a lot of devotees who have this problem. And then I started discussing with devotees, do you have this problem? And I was surprised how many had it and how much it wasn't being addressed. And then I started doing workshops, and it was really crazy at how many people were coming that I thought would never need it. It was kind of shocking, actually, and seeing sometimes how upset and angry they were. So I was getting this vision of what's going on underneath that's not being addressed. And then Ram Baru and I were talking about something that's really interesting, but really sad, how in our movement, even though we have this principle of revealing your mind in confidence, it's not such a common thing. And I was telling her, a lot of my workshops, Friday night, there's 30 people there. Friday night, like 3 people will share, maximum. Everyone's terrified to open up. What will other people think? And then, Saturday comes and they start loosening up and you get 6 or 7. And then by Sunday, you get like almost everybody, because they're not used to doing it and they're afraid of doing it. And probably most of you or all of you know that you can't heal if you don't talk about something. And so it's kind of sad that in some places we've created a culture where it's not really kosher to talk about something because it kind of makes you look bad. But that's what we need to do. So I want to tell you some more stories of my experience of why this is, and I want to ask also you if you have such stories. So at a certain point in my exploration, most of my exploration was really with myself, and as I would explore myself and grow, I would learn, and I would start discussing with devotees, do you have these feelings, problems, do you think this way, etc. And when I would find that this is a common problem, then I would think, okay, I should teach this. So one of the problems that I was dealing with was the problem of, I'm a devotee, I'm supposed to be pure, but I'm not. And I don't like myself because I'm not pure, and I feel guilty or shame. Or, and also, I sometimes neglect my spiritual practice, and I realize, well, if I had more self-love, then I would be more determined, or I wouldn't do things to harm myself. And I think, why would I do things to harm myself? It's really weird. And so I started, thinking about this. I'm actually going to be teaching a workshop on this at the end of October. But anyway, here's my story about this. It was quite interesting. So this one girl, she was living in the temple. It's Argentina. So it was like my second trip to Argentina. I had created some relationship with her that she would sometimes ask me questions. So she said that we were preparing for, I think it was Rath Yatra or Janmashtami something. She said, and during that time I didn't chant any rounds. Can you help me with that? And I asked her a question. I don't think, I mean, some of you might ask, but I don't think any like sannyasi or guru would ask. And I said, did your parents neglect you? That was the question I asked her. She wanted advice how to, what to do about not chanting rounds. And that was my first question. Did your parents neglect her? And she was like, what kind of question is that to ask? And so I was thinking, she was neglected by her parents, therefore she neglects herself. And therefore she doesn't, because she neglects herself, she didn't care enough about taking care of herself to chant her rounds. So she said, yes, I was neglected by your parents. And then I went on to explain that I think you've developed this lack of self-love because they didn't love you. And she said, yes. And I said, that's why you didn't chant your rounds. And she said, yes. So how many preachers in ISKCON would have understood that? It's what would the normal answer be? Like Brajalila, if you didn't know anything about psychology or anything else, what would be the standard, answer to get an A on your test if someone says, I'm not chanting? What would you tell them? What's the standard? You got a shloka for that? What's your shloka? Or anybody wants to share their shloka for that? Something about determination, wouldn't it be? Something like that? Dridhavrata, shloka. You have a shloka, Ramburu?
Well, it's disobedience to the spiritual master, order of the spiritual master. I mean, it's one of the 10 offenses. It's a big one for people. Boy, does that make
yeah, that's a good one.
Guilty. Ooh, guilty.
Little shaming there, right?
Shame and guilt. Yep.
How could you do that? You're turning your back on your guru. You're stabbing him in the heart. Yeah. Or I was thinking, or that's a good one. Or Dridhavrata. Or you made a vow. How could you break it? Yeah.
Animal.
Yeah. So then I made another discovery. It's really strange because it puts me as a teacher also, even though I know this, in an awkward situation. In my work of just trying to help devotees, we all know how pervasive low self-esteem is. And so many devotees would come to me and they don't like themselves. They feel bad about themselves. They're not confident, this and that. And they're always thinking, what's wrong with them? And you say, low self-esteem is the opposite of arrogance. Arrogance is like you're average and you think you're great, and low self-esteem is you're average and you think you're nothing. It's just, in reverse, basically, right? Unless you're a sociopath or narcissist. If you've got some narcissistic personality disorder, then you'll think you're great. But and I found this problem, like, how do you teach humility to people with low self-esteem? Because it makes them feel worse. Because one of the principles of humility is don't find fault in others, find it in yourself. And a person with low self-esteem, that's all they do, is find fault in themselves, and they're like depressed because they do it. And so I was realizing, when you teach humility, if you don't understand that, like, I don't know the figures, maybe some of you know, like how, 1/3 of the people have low self-esteem. Maybe it's 99%, I don't know. But a large part of the population is dealing with it. And you're talking about humility. Have to look at your faults, don't look at the faults of others, look at yourself. Fantastic instructions, it's Bhaktisiddhanta's instructions. But for a person with a severe case of low self-esteem, that actually is destructive to them because they're dealing with all these, just facing all their faults and judging themselves because of it. When you have healthy self-esteem, you can look at your fault because you don't judge it. You just look at it so you can improve it, right? You have low self-esteem, you look at your fault, you become depressed. You're like, I'm so bad. And so it puts us in a really awkward position, isn't it, as leaders and teachers and friends, when you have to know a lot about the person to know even that sometimes the philosophy can backfire. So here's maybe the icing on the cake of my experience, just to show you how complex this can be and how and how insightful we need to be as leaders, as friends, as teachers. So I met one girl from England. She was in New Vrindavan. In New Vrindavan, I gave it was like an hour and a half, just a little short thing on forgiveness. We did one exercise. And then I went to do a forgiveness course, a full course, which is like 15 hours in London. And she was there and she took the course. And it's very rare by the end of the course that people would still be holding on to something. And she's a nice lady, young lady, really nice. And she came up to me like the next day and she said, I can't let it go. And so I did all the like, well, didn't you do this process and that process? And what about this verse and this purport? And look at it this way and that. And nothing worked. And so after 2.5 hours, I said, well, who do you have to forgive? And she said, the ashram leader. So we're talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. And she said, after 2 hours, she said, the ashram leader reminds me of my father. And I was like, my Sherlock Holmes hat was on. I was like, oh, here's a clue. We're going to get to something. So I said, tell me about this, your father. And she said, my father, I think she said, either they grew up in Dubai, I think they grew up in Dubai and he worked in India, or they grew up in India and he worked in Dubai. He was never home. He was always gone, and he was supporting the family, so his connection to the family was money. He was doing his duty. But his mother was distraught because she had no connection, no emotional support. So this woman grew up looking with her mother's, she wasn't depressed, but growing up with her mother's depression. And it made her very sad and hurt. And so we realized she needed to forgive her father in order to reestablish a relationship with the ashram leader. It was kind of like, how would you ever figure that? It took like 2.5 hours of talking to her before, like, wait a minute, your father. And then she acknowledged, she said, yeah, that's the problem. So my point is, we're complex creatures, and specifically what's going on in the world now, as we well know, Kali Yuga is in full swing. You probably noticed, right? It's like, it's on the freeway. It's going pretty fast, right? And there's a lot of figures out there that are quite depressing about what's going on. And I don't want to depress you. But I think you know how rampant psychological disease is. You know how, as a cause of divorced families, abuse, negligent parents, addicted parents, and so forth. It's rampant. You probably know how rampant pornography is because of this thing, which, has ruined everything. And this thing itself is an addiction. So we know how rampant addictions are compared to what they used to be. We are meeting in our preaching work very, very nice people, and when they start associating, sometimes we see how they can't get along with anybody. Or we see how they become extremely codependent on other people to pick them up. They're like balloons. You have to blow them up all the time. Or we see what I call the black and blue syndrome. What's the black and blue syndrome? You ever get a shot, and then you're all swollen, and it's really... And somebody meets you, go, hey, Rumber, how you doing? And they hit you right on that spot, and you're like, ah! And all they did is just like that. It doesn't hurt. How many people have you ever dealt with where you just said one thing? I think it would be a good idea if we did this, and they run off into their room crying. I once said in a temple, I don't want to tell you where or why, it was a complicated situation. The temple had been going through a lot of difficulties and stress, and I said, we should all be happy. And one lady took offense at that because the situation was difficult. So this is what we're dealing with now. And so the point of this talk, which I also gave to educators who were teaching people, because I wanted them to be aware of this, the point of this talk is obvious, that unless we know, unless we're able to diagnose to some degree, even in a general way, what's going on internally, we often miss the mark when we pull out the purport or the verse, and indeed sometimes we make the situation worse because it feels like we're not empathic and we're judging and condemning. And this has been our basic mode of operandus. And it's hard for me to say this because this is how Prabhupada trained us. And this is what we're supposed to do. But I find it a problem now if people who are teachers are not aware of these things, especially if they're in leading positions and they have to counsel devotees and they're not really trained counselors and they don't know these things, then it can be detrimental, if not disastrous, for the people they're teaching. I think you all understand this, don't you? I hope you do. Or if you don't, I think it'll become more and more obvious. So in understanding this, I had been teaching Japa retreats, and I began to bring in psychology, a lot of psychology into the Japa retreats, because I had understood something about the internal processes that were going on when people were chanting, because I could feel it in the workshop. And I brought this thing of self-love into the Japa workshop, because so many people would say, I don't chant well, I can't get up early. And I would think, okay, maybe a little more self-love would help you. And as I started teaching concepts of self-love and self-care and self-compassion, we have devotee care, we have to take care of devotees. Yeah, well, what about self-care, No, I'm not worth it, Prabhu, I'm useless, I'm hopeless, even my mother didn't like me, that kind of thing. So then it really resonated with many, many devotees that if I just increase my self-care consciousness, my sadhana gets better. Like, who would have thought of that? And I once wrote an article on self-compassion, and someone commented, this is a bunch of New Age psychology. And I said, no, it's not. It's in Prabhupada's books. He talks about saving yourself first. He talks about spiritual suicide. He's always asking us, become Krishna conscious, which means to do that, you have to take care of yourself. He's begging us, actually. Go back to Godhead in this lifetime. There's so much self-care in there. But if you don't see it from that perspective, you don't notice it. It just looks like philosophy. And so as we applied this, it was resonating with people, and people could see, okay, I don't feel like chanting now. I don't, it's hard to concentrate when you chant. It's easier just to chant, not concentrate, isn't it? Kind of space out, it seems easier. And so by bringing in this consciousness of self-love, self-care, self-compassion, it actually improved japa. Isn't that interesting? And then there was another thing that I saw, which was interesting. I don't know if any of you have been to any of my japa programs where I talked about this. But I started to see energy was changing in the workshop, and there was some fear on a subtle level. And I could see, because especially at a retreat, you go deep into holy name and it starts working on you. And when it's working on you, you feel a little more detached. You feel like surrendering a little more. And sometimes when you feel that way, it becomes a little scary because you think, if I keep going this way, I'm going to be detached from A, B, C, and D. I don't know if I can handle that. I don't know if I want that. Have you ever felt like that before? Like, slow down. It's going, it's like this Krishna consciousness is nice, but it's going a little too fast. Like, I don't know if I can handle this. Anyway, I was sensing that because we were in this environment where our japa was so good that it was obvious that if you are chanting that way, you're going to be a different person. You're going to lose interest in certain things. And some people started becoming uncomfortable. So I had asked them, I'd say, are you afraid that if you chant like this, you'll have to surrender? So many hands went up. I said, so what are you afraid of? And everybody made their list. Well, I'll have to, if Krishna sees me, I'm just whatever you want, he's going to send me to Siberia to peel potatoes. That's it. That was our joke. And in San Francisco in 1970, the temple president said, if you don't do what I say, we send you to Siberia. And now I have a disciple in Siberia. She goes, no, it's nice here. It's really beautiful in the summer. Yeah. I guess it's nice in the summer. Yeah. But anyway, the Krishna consciousness is there, so it's nice. But, there were these fears. Krishna will take away my money. All these fears were coming up. And so I realized at that point, we have to do a process to help them overcome their fears, because these fears are blocking them from progressing in their japa. There's like a brick wall, that a threshold. It's like I was thinking, and they confirmed it. I was thinking, you probably have a subconscious threshold on your japa, because if you go beyond that threshold, then all these fears that come up when you talk about surrender are going to come up, and you can't deal with them. So I started, making my approaches to deal with things that are going on a subtle level that we don't talk about, and doing exercises to work through them. And it was quite effective. And in fact, there's this program called Kirtan Academy in Mayapur. So I used to live in Mayapur, and they would ask me to speak there. They have a program every year. So I spoke there several times. And one time I gave a whole talk, I think it's on SoundCloud, and I'll have to say I'm quite proud of it. It was all on how your psychology affects your japa. And honestly, right now, I can't remember everything I said, because I was in that space at that time, because I was teaching so much japa, but I was seeing their psychological functions, like, Krishna doesn't even care about me, so what does it matter if I chant well or not? Things like that, You can understand that some people might think that way. What does Krishna care about me anyway? If I chant well or not? He doesn't care. He's already got enough gopis and gopas. Why does he need me? Things of that nature. So I would go down the list, and and Trinadapi Sunichena, if you have low self-esteem, you need to be uplifted and praised and appreciated. That's just what happens, right? Isn't it? Isn't that a symptom? You don't uplift yourself. You don't praise yourself. You're always putting yourself down. You need other people to do it. How does that work with Trinadapi Sunichena? It doesn't. It's the opposite. How does that affect our japa? Isn't it? And then we went into this very sad but funny situation where, when we have some problem with a devotee, and it's very disturbing, that enters our japa, and we don't know how to process that. And maybe we're a revengeful person. Maybe we're a kind of person that needs to be right, and we can't let it go. And so the whole time during japa, we're going through our mind, analyzing how that person is wrong and we're right. Have you ever done that before? I don't recommend it, but I have to be honest, I have. And the funniest thing is, like, I was convinced 10 times more at the end of Japa how right I was and how wrong they were. That's my Japa empowered my ego in that situation. So these internal processes have so much effect. And I felt that, oh yeah, so we have a sad story for you. I'll end with a sad story. I want to hear from you also if you have any experiences like this, both on the good side and the bad side. But before I do, I want to tell you a sad story. So I have a disciple in Lithuania, and her father left home, I don't know why, when she was like 5. Maybe he was an alcoholic, whatever, but he left and he didn't support the family. And I don't know the details, but she had a very toxic and traumatic relationship with him. And she moved, part of the reason she moved out of Lithuania was to be away from him. And she came back to Lithuania, and I'm not sure why, but anyway, she was planning to stay there. I think I was encouraging her to stay there. And her father, who she hadn't really had any relationship with for many, many years, wanted to establish some kind of relationship, and she didn't trust him. It was, she was traumatized by the relationship, so she couldn't be near him. So he would find her on the Sankirtan, on Harinam, and he would go out with a Harinam party to be with her. And she was really upset. And he would come to the temple, and so forth. So he's taking part in Krishna consciousness. And she called me up and said, my father is stalking me. What should I do? I don't know if I can stay here in Lithuania. And I said, well, we should talk to the president. He should protect you. And she said, yeah, I spoke to him, but he doesn't understand. I said, well, I have a disciple who's a psychologist. Ask him if she can talk to him and explain what stalking is, explain why you're so affected by this. She was in a really bad state. She was ready to leave the country, and she was quite upset. I don't know if she was having panic attacks, but it was pretty serious. So she asked him, and she got back to me, and he said, I have no interest in psychology. That was his response. So and so this is not an uncommon response for people in our movement, for leaders in our movement. And I think it's a kind of spiritual bypass when we do those things. Because we generally say spiritual bypass is we ignore a problem that we have and we just think we'll solve it by bypassing what we really have to do to heal it and just going to the spiritual process thinking it will solve it. Well, that's what he was doing with her. He was doing a bypass on her. And so I think a lot of our leaders do that, not because they're bad people, but because they don't know any better. So that was my message. And that was also my message when I gave this talk to teachers. I said, because I did a training in how to facilitate workshops and retreats. And one of the things they told me that I thought was so valuable, he said, whatever your topic is, you have to clearly understand what is the conditioning that people are facing with that particular problem. And then you can attack it. You can get the dead center. Once I did that, my seminars went from, oh, they were good, to like, yeah, that was really good. Because we hit the nail on the head. You ever hear a lecture and you're like, where's this going? It doesn't relate to anything. And, after about 10 minutes, you start looking at your phone. You ever been to those? Yeah, I know the answer is yes. So I shouldn't have to ask. Yeah. So, but you ever been to a lecture where it's like, Prabhu, you must have been talking about me? Because he hit the universal conditioning on the head, right? So that was such a valuable lesson for me. And that's every workshop I gave. If I didn't know what the conditioning is and someone said, can you give a workshop on this topic? I said, what is the challenge? What are devotees going through? What are they saying? What's the anartha here? What is the essence of it? So I think that's what we're dealing with when devotees have problems, to understand what is actually the problem on a deeper level. because as I said, sometimes it can be counterproductive just to speak philosophy and not understand. There's so many pathologies out there. You know, what if you're dealing with a person who's a narcissist and you're speaking to them about being humble? Yeah. Do you think you could make Donald Trump humble? I don't think so. You know, give him a few shlokas. You think Trinadapi Sunicena would work on Donald Trump? What do you think, Pineshwari? If you like Donald Trump, I don't mean to offend him, but probably not work, right? You know, he, there are, you know, there are different natures according to different emotional and mental problems that people have. And sometimes if you're trying to solve a problem with someone and you don't even know what the disorder is they have, it's like you're wasting your time. If you're a good preacher, you might get a few days of grace where they actually improve, it's seemingly, but they don't. Let me tell you one more thing, and then I want to open it up. I developed a workshop on sexual purity, and as a result of that workshop, or just a result of talking about it here and there, many men write me, and I would say in 100% of the cases, they have no understanding that they're addicted. They just say, you know, I look at pornography and I want to stop and I can't, or it's difficult. Well, the definition of addiction is you're doing something that's bad for you and you can't stop, right? That's the simple definition, isn't it? It's bad for you. Okay, if you're not addicted, you stop because you understand it's bad for you. Even though you like it, you know, it's bad for me. I stopped eating wheat because on Ekadasis, my body didn't hurt. I was like, okay, it's either wheat, beans, or rice. Which one is it? So I dropped the wheat and it was like, oh yeah, my body, I don't have to sleep as much. I go, okay. That, I was a bit addicted to it, but it wasn't good for me, so I could stop it. So if you know something's bad for you and you can't stop it, I hate to say it, but you're addicted. And some of us are addicted to this thing, right? And chocolate and weed and whatever. All right, there's some addictions aren't that bad. But these men didn't know they were addicted, you know, and I would break the bad news to them because they're saying, well, you know, getting up at 2 o'clock, I'm chanting my rounds, it's going well for a few weeks, and then I give in. This is like the typical letter. And I get many messages, Prabhu, Prabhu, they're like really serious, Prabhu, Prabhu, I have to talk to you. Can you leave a voice message? No, Prabhu, I have to talk to you personally. I know exactly what it is. I can tell them what they're going to tell me because I've heard it so many times. And I have one line for you. Prabhu, you're addicted and you need a program for addicts. And 99.9% of the time, they just needed someone to tell them because they kind of knew it, but they didn't know it. And when I tell them, it's like, yeah, you can't give this up. You've been trying. And so the confusing point is you say, okay, I'm going to be more serious about my Krishna consciousness. And then you give it up for 3 weeks and you think, oh, it's working. I don't have an addiction. And then 3 weeks and one day, you give in again. And you go through that again and again and again. And then the other problem we face is that a lot of devotees just believe, and maybe it's true for some, that all my problems will be solved by chanting. And well, if you chant that purely and you don't have such deep problems, yeah, it's true. But people ask me, say, well, will my problems be solved by chanting? And I'll say, well, tell me, do you still have them? Doesn't that answer the question? I was like, why are you asking me? You should know by your own experience. And they just need someone to tell them that because they think, well, it's a deviation. Like if I should do any kind of therapy, that would be a deviation. It would be a sign of lack of faith. And the leader also may think who's teaching, well, it'll be a sign of my lack of faith in the philosophy if I preach that. So this is the kind of ignorance. So I thought maybe we could open it up and say, if you have any experiences on the positive or negative side where like you understood a problem and you guided a person who is maybe getting bad guidance, because I deal with that a lot, or you in your life gave bad guidance to someone and later you realized they had a problem that you didn't understand. So I will sit back and be happy to, anyone, just you want to speak up or raise your hand, or we'd like to hear from you. Praneshwari, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everybody.
I know Praneshwari when you were Well,
10.
10?
10.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on two things. One is when you were talking about japa, and this is about me and not somebody else, and my advice to them, but when you said how sometimes we're afraid to chant japa nicely, whatever, because we're afraid that Krishna's going to take away everything. And I remember specifically, Radhana Swami was in San Diego one day, and I actually asked him that question.
Ah,
How am I'm feeling, why I'll be going along chanting, doing everything's really nicely, and for some reason I sabotage myself.
acha.
What am I afraid of? And I think he asked me, what are you afraid of? Maybe that's what he asked me. And I told him, I think I said, Queen Kunti says, I want to suffer all these, this suffering, that suffering, take everything away, so I remember you. And I said, that scares me. And
Yeah.
he said to me, well, Kunti didn't lose anybody. She still had her family with her. She went back to her family. And that was just like a wake-up call. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh, that's true. I mean, it was such a simple answer that I was just thinking, and I thought as you were speaking that we have we make up so many things, or
yeah, exactly.
we spin out so many things from this thought,
Yeah.
thinking so many things that happen, especially like you said, the verses Krishna takes everything away is scary. And that was quite I guess a revelation to me. Another, maybe it's a question or a
Can I
comment.
give you a
Yeah.
little mantra for that just before we go
Yeah.
on?
Yeah.
Fears are just fairy tale stories, or just stories we make up. That's all they are.
Yes.
And
Nice.
if you look
Nice.
at it, if you look at it that way, you'll realize, yeah, I'm just making up all these stories. Siberia pill potatoes, this and
The other
that.
thing
Yeah,
I
okay.
was thinking of,
Yes.
when you were speaking, when you said that when somebody comes to you saying, and you just have to tell them that's an addiction, or that's this. When do you know? Like, when do you, and I'm a, coordinator for the Sunday school. A lot of parents come to me
Yeah.
with a lot of questions. And questions like this, for example, I'm going to come out and say this. Well, I won't say this because it's recorded. I'll say this later on. But anyway, any kinds of questions that, of the personal nature, maybe about the high standards of family relations between husband and wife that are married. The high standards, once only a month, they're only for children. And,
Yeah.
this kind of thing is there.
Yeah.
And that parents come to you and ask you, is that what we're supposed to be at? Is that the level we're supposed to be at? So my answer, and this is what I'm thinking, because let's be honest, is that I say that is what you want to aim for, but you got to start from where you are. And so, I mean, these kinds of, how honest are you? Yes, Prabhupada does say that in the Bhagavatam and Bhagavatam, so many places, that this is what the standard is. But how many are at that standard? What's the how we have to be realistic? No, that's my question, I guess.
Well, I have some news for you. One devotee is writing a book on this topic, and she asked me to edit it, so I got to read it all. And I wrote, and you'll be surprised who wrote the book on the topic, because she said what you said, and that's Devaki Mataji, who's generally very conservative. This was very liberal. I told her, it's usually the liberals that are on your case. Now the conservatives will be on your case for this chapter. And I said, well, I'm glad you wrote it, and I didn't, because if I did, I would get my rear end kicked for saying those things, because I'm in a position where I can't publicly say that, which is sad. But I told her, you're going to get flack for this. And she said, well, people hate me anyway, so. So I think we're talking about honest discussions, and the culture of ISKCON is that those kinds of things go on behind closed doors. It's difficult in public because it's not PC in public to talk about those things. So I think your answer is perfect. And I think that's the answer for everything. We have a goal and we have to be real and honest and not pretend. At the same time, not have faith that I can reach, that the process is powerful enough for me to reach the goal. You know, it's a balance, you know, because you don't want to shame people and make them feel guilty. At the same time, you want to be able to help them go higher without making them feel like you're making them feel bad by telling them they could be better. Because sometimes, you know, you tell someone to be better. Oh, you think I'm bad. So anyway, just tell them to read that book and you're like, we don't have to, you know, I didn't write the book. She did it. She came out and did it. She's gone from A to Z. She's quoting Prabhupada and stories where, you know, a man was going to see a prostitute and Prabhupada said, isn't he married? Why is he going to see, you know, things like that. So I think it supports what you said. But these are, you know, in some parts of the world, if you say that, you're going to be in the president's office. Not in San Diego, I don't think. Do they have a president in San Diego? I don't know. Yeah, so you won't be in the president's office because they don't have one. That solves that problem, yeah. Might be in the GBC's office, though. But no, yeah. This also opens up Pandora's box for a whole other discussion of, you know, being more forthright in talking about what's real and the problems, which I do in my seminars because that's the nature of those seminars. They're not public and people are mature enough. Yeah, so Mitravindra and Ramburu, does Mitravindra, she's still here or she had her hand up?
She had her hand up and then I don't see her now. Mitravinda, are you there?
I don't
I
see
don't know
her
what
name.
happened. I don't know. She may have had to get off or I don't see her.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is a different sort of problem, but it may be tied into it. It's a problem that it's taken me a long time to figure out and really, you know, as I work with more and more women in our movement, and trauma and understanding how 1 in 3 women have been physically, emotionally, sexually abused in some way, and how much childhood trauma plays into our ability to so-called surrender. And, you know, some of the injunctions of this notion that, you know, the wife needs to worship, serve the husband as the guru and this kind of thing. And, you know, in Kali Yuga, women just sort of don't do that, you know, and so there's a lot of bashing around Kali Yuga women and they're not surrendered and this is a problem. So everybody's focusing on trying to coerce a woman to somehow or other artificially submit to a man in some ways. And that has, truth be told, traumatized an enormous amount of women, my generation and beyond. What I've realized as I've studied Prabhupada's books is when he says it all, when he says, you know, as your spiritual master, or you need to make them love you. And then they will do whatever you like, you know, in the sense that it really is on the onus of the man to inspire a woman to want to serve and surrender. But as soon as you start to coerce, now you are triggering, and every woman who has trauma in her background is going to kick you, you know, and it just is the wrong approach. And I see this, you know, as a mother, grandmother with my son, who some of you know had a medical emergency. So here now I'm living in Australia. But I have, in the last 4 months being here, had to perform innumerable sacrifices on his behalf because I love that guy. You know, I just absolutely, it was just nothing I can think of I wouldn't do for this kid of mine, you know, and I realized, well, no one is forcing me. I'm, you know, no sleep, no doing all this stuff, you know, bones aching, cracking, to do these things, but I do it voluntarily. And I think that's the key to bhakti in terms of our job as leaders, managers, husbands, is that we have to inspire. And if people aren't inspired to do for you, that's your problem. It's not their problem. It's really a reflection of yours. And Prabhupada used to cry when people would leave. He would say, I couldn't save them. So instead of victim blaming and saying, oh, the person's just a demon karmi, not serious. No, look at the mirror. It's you. It's you that's not inspiring. That's the problem.
Yes.
So I want to say this because I work with so many women, and there's so much, like you say, it's marital problems and you know, coercing, name calling, and women blaming. And, you know, if we look silly as women, it's probably because we have a lot of trauma on board, and we're so used to not having a voice that when we do give a lecture or when we do something, we come out not having practice. We don't get those chances. And so I just wanted to advocate for you know, a woman's position in some ways, and that is that I think they have an enormous amount of advantage because we have the natural tendency to be emotionally available. And so we have a lot we can do to help the world heal. I just want to throw that out there.
Beautiful. I was, you won't believe this, Rambaru, but today I made a video on that very topic. And whatever you said, I said, and that point on inspiring, in the corporate world, they look at management as people follow you because you have authority, and they look at leadership as people follow you because they're inspired. So managers, you know, it's like, oh, you don't have to be a leader if you're a manager, but it doesn't work in the long run because you're just working off authority. I'm your husband, you should do it. That's why you should do it.
Yeah.
But the same is for, like you say, the same is for a guru. A guru can't rely on authority. None of us can rely on authority. We have to be leaders.
Entitlement. Yeah.
You reminded me of one story, and then Brajalila, I'll call on you. But I think it's a useful story. It's a sad story, but it underscores what we're talking about. I was in a country, and at this time, a young woman had left her husband, and she was emotionally abused by neglect. He never touched her. He never, they never had kids, and so forth. And her therapist said, you are undergoing the trauma of abuse, even though he was never verbally abusive. It was due to his lack of presence.
Yeah.
And she tried to explain this to her spiritual master, and he thought she was making excuses because she wanted to get a divorce. He didn't believe it. And he told her to stay. And she kept saying, I can't stay, I can't stay. He still didn't understand the psychology of it. So he said, well, you can separate, but you can never remarry. And she was like 24, I think, at that time, or 25 or something. And she was in an industry in which she's surrounded by men. And she is quite a catch for those men because she's by her position in that industry. So it was like ridiculous and impossible for her to be single, and she knew it. And she tried to explain that to him, and he didn't understand. And she actually became suicidal because she said, I can't stay with my husband and I can't not get remarried, so I can't follow my guru. And he wouldn't budge. And she actually contemplated suicide. Now, could you imagine if she actually killed herself? And we could trace it back to the cause being the guru's lack of understanding and appreciation of the trauma that she had gone through. Later, I spoke to her husband, and he finally understood after the divorce what happened. And he said, I had turned my emotions off in the name of Krishna consciousness because that's how my guru was preaching. So the guru didn't understand, and they were preaching to them all the quotes about staying together and family life and good relationships. And he was emotionally toxic because of trying to follow those instructions. Their guru, you won't believe this, told them you should not even touch. Could you believe? Because that's like amazing. You should not even touch. So he went through serious depression when he realized how he treated her and how that caused her to leave. But I just wanted to show that's an extreme example of a leader not understanding the psychological processes of individuals and being so-called authority on marriage, because he can quote all the things Prabhupada said, and destroying a marriage and destroying two people with those quotes. Isn't that amazing? How you can quote Prabhupada and destroy people. It's crazy. I just thank you for reminding me of that. And so, Brajalila, please, let's hear from you.
Hari Hari. Thank you so much, Mahatma Prabhu. Thank you for doing this. It's so much needed. And I guess my question is just in terms of what you were sharing just now, I wanted to add something to that. And also
Okay.
I wanted you to elaborate on what do we do in terms of reconciling the fact that many leaders think that us taking shelter of only chanting Hare Krishna is what is primary to our Siddhanta. And using you as an example, what you are bringing to the awareness of the ISKCON community is actually secondary. You're sharing about self-love, self-care, self-compassion, and it appears that in the ISKCON organization, it could create more fragmentation because there are these two schools of thought. And so how do we reconcile this from what you're seeing being on the ground?
Oh, what I'm seeing on the ground is the people who think against it don't even have any interest in what I'm doing, and I don't think they really know that much about what I'm doing. And I think if they did, and I could show the Shastra for it and put the dots together, then they would understand it, unless they're diehards that this is, I think those diehards are a small percentage, actually. But I've had to put myself out on a limb for what I believe, and I'm ready to take the consequences and stand by it. Because in my preparation and work with the holy name, I've never read anywhere where there's any verse that says that the holy name is a cure for trauma. It might be, but there's no shloka for that guarantees that. It's a cure for material contamination. You could say, well, yeah, the trauma is coming from the modes of nature, so when you transcend those modes. But I think anyone who's been around long enough knows that so-and-so Prabhu 50 years ago was like this, and today he's just a more refined version of that same person that kind of, is not maybe your personal cup of tea because he's a little rough around the edges, but he's not as rough. And so we see, but he's a great devotee, he's more detached, he's very devoted, but we see these other things. It's just evidence that if those other things are going to change at all, sometimes there have to be other processes. So because I see that, I just stand on that, and I actually get more appreciation for this than I thought I would get. I thought I was going to get the whip. And I've only got whipped by one person, but he whips everybody, and he doesn't really understand, so I wasn't worried about that. So that's my experience. Now, maybe they whip me behind my back and I don't know it. But I think generally they just don't understand. They don't understand, and so they say things that are, I don't know if that's a good or right answer. This is my experience.
Well, part of Mahatma, just jump in here. Part of the reason people don't, they don't know what they don't know. If you have not done your own inner work, your own self-exploration, you can't understand what you're seeing in others. It's really part of the bhakti process to do our own archaeological dig into our own hearts and weed out the anarthas, which I believe have a lot to do with unresolved and unprocessed grief and trauma. And if you haven't done that, if you haven't really dug around in your own losses and grieved those losses and the traumatic pain, then you're really disgusted and uncomfortable when other people are doing that. And you're now your defense mechanisms are like, that is too close to home for me. And now I'm projecting my own discomfort on you and making you the disgusting person. And I think that's a symptom of a
that's a good
person's
point.
unrealized, unintegrated self, that the more judgmental and disgusted they are and rigid is a dead giveaway on the work that they haven't done in themselves.
Yes.
A realized soul has no privacy, has no secrets, is an open book, is completely comfortable, sees Krishna in everyone and everything, so yeah, that's a dead giveaway.
I think also, like you're saying, some of those people, by their behavior, kind of make it obvious that they're not so balanced. And so a lot of people don't
Reflects back.
really buy into that. They can
Yeah.
see that, their statements they make they're not in consideration of the whole thing. But I don't know what your experience is, Brajalila, if you've got negative feedback from any of the kind of work you're doing.
Well, I get both. I specifically remember one situation with a sannyasi, and I'll make this really brief. I was doing a program in Mayapur, and I was introducing some speakers, and I was sitting in the front, and he came behind me, and I didn't know, I wasn't aware he had entered the room. He came behind me, and he touched me. I don't, maybe he didn't touch me, but maybe he was just sharing this a little loudly. He said, "Get up. Get up." And I was stunned. I was like, I turned around. I was like, whoa, what's going on, And so he said it like a couple of more times. And then I realized, okay, I could go two ways with this. I could go where he's going, or I could just kind of think, I could go and inside and understand, what is his need? What is it that he needs? Why he's saying what he's saying? And so I understood that he needed a seat. He needed to sit down because the place was packed. And so instead of me going where he was going, I said, "It seems, Maharaj, you need a seat. And so I'm going to arrange for someone to get you a seat." I didn't get up. I asked one of the men to go and get him a seat. So I think it was a year later, or maybe a year later, I saw the sannyasi was again coming behind me. And he was calling my name, Mataji. He was not my name, I'm sorry. He was saying, "Mataji, Mataji, Mataji," behind me. And I was thinking, oh no, not this sannyas again. Oh, I want to make one other point. At that program, I also arranged, because I was facilitating the program, for that sannyasi to be served personally, prashadam. So he was taken care of very nicely. And so that next year, he's behind me, "Mataji, Mataji," and I didn't understand what was happening. So anyway, I stopped, and he came up to me, and this is a really like a true story. He was almost gonna like hug me, and I was like, whoa, what's going on? And he said, "I just want to apologize. I just got finished taking the leadership guru course, and I learned so many things that I did not know."
Wow.
I wanted to cry. I remember that so clearly, because he was a sannyasi. He'd been in our movement, for so many years, whatever. And so he shared that with me. He said, I didn't know, and I just want to apologize to you.
Beautiful.
So the reason I brought this up is because education is so important, as Rambaru Prabhu is sharing. If devotees are not educated about the secondary, as it's labeled, and the primary together, and how they actually can be integrated with each other, then we will lose a lot in our institution.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I don't even see it secondary, because it affects, if you want to call it secondary, but it affects the primary. So it's not secondary in that sense. I want to tell you a story. We had, on my birthday, I asked the devotees, I said, "Why don't you share what your service was rather than glorify me?" I'm not, that's kind of austerity for me, just to sit and listen. So they would, various devotees would come up and describe what they did. And I noticed a pattern, that those who were most materially stable were doing the most. And the ones who were not materially stable were doing the least. And I said, oh, okay. We know this, but it was just, It's just obvious, isn't it? Emotionally and materially stable people always have the best marriages, do the most service, are liked the most, and so forth. So how could it and how could it be secondary in that sense? So, who else would like to share? Or ask questions? Or
Well,
make comments?
let's also go. We have a little time. If there's no questions or comments, let's
Looks-
go to takeaways. Maybe people have a reflection. What are they learning? What have they heard?
Looks like Damayanti. Do you, no, no.
Where's Damayanti? Oh, there's Me Tool.
I want to look in the, I want to, oh, me too. I want to look in the chat also because maybe there's something.
Yeah, Me Tool has a question. He's there. He's got his hand up and ready to go.
Okay, me too.
Mhm.
We're ready for you. You have to unmute.
You can lip sync.
I'm sorry, my mistake. Huh? Hare Krishna, everyone, and thank you for this wonderful class. Okay, so when I was listening, okay, this gonna be a little bit off topic. I mean to say, so I have a one question is when you said that when people doing japa session, doing chanting, they bit scared that okay they're gonna detach from everything. So okay, I'm not that much into that. I've just joined this one a year ago. So how would I reach that part? Like how can I achieve those things? I mean to say, when I'm doing chanting, I'm not much focused. So yeah, I sometimes when I do it very well, not very well, like one round, I guess I feel very blissful. So I wanted to have that feeling every time I do the chanting. So is there, if you can guide me something that can help me to reach to that stage?
Oh yeah, I can guide you. It's called mahatmadas.com. There's like 500 hours of lectures to answer that question.
Oh.
Or just get my book, Japa Affirmations.
Japa
This is-
affirmation. Oh, okay.
This is I'll tell you one thing, right?
Mhm.
It's quite simple. Krishna is in his name, and we don't believe it. And that's why we neglect it. And if you just act as if Krishna is in his name, you will realize it. And when you realize it, you can't neglect it. But when you don't realize it, it's easy to neglect. So when I chant, I try to be very aware that I'm with Krishna right now. Like I was chanting this morning and I was thinking, well, if Radha and Krishna are here in their name, I'm in the Leela right now. So that's pretty amazing. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. You know, that's how I, process it. So it's like, we were in the Leela. I think I should read some of the comments because
Thank you, Guruji.
Yes, go ahead.
only problem with the comments is I don't know the context because they were, anyway, I'll read them. Maybe you remember context. Brilliant explanation and conclusion. It will help those attempting to become devotees in this institution. I don't know what it refers to. This is so great, perfect. Mitravinda said, devotees are criticized and ridiculed for doing selfie care, spending time exercising, resting. Not much has changed. Thanks for your open reflections. It's, it's not good. There's a 12-step program, Bhakti Recovery. It's awesome, from Diane. Thank you for saying that, from Dana, I don't know what I said, but if it inspired you, that's good. Krishnangi says she's heard women with similar stories. There are many. Paneshwari says, I have a problem with the fact those who have no experience with marriage or children rearing try to teach or advise those who are under their care. Rumber says, Prabhupada said we should not speak or teach on topics we have not realized ourselves. Diana says, thank you for this lecture. I start teaching a new class of students Monday. I'm going to remember What is the conditioning I'm up against? Another thing I learned in another lecture, which is really beautiful. Don't say what's wrong with you, but instead what happened to you.
Hmm.
Do you like it when people say what's wrong with you? Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for doing this. So much needed. Great response. I think that was in great response. That was Rajalila for your response. Yeah. And okay, so
Ananda has her hand up.
okay, Ananda, can we see your lotus face?
Hey, Haribol.
Haribo, Jai.
So, wow, yeah, thank you so much for this. Just a couple of comments. One, I've heard it said that Prabhupada said first health, then sadhana, then service.
Yes.
Is that true?
It's going around. I've never seen the original, but
Mm,
if you're not healthy, I guess you can't do sadhana. So it does seem.
yeah, I would say.
But you know the letter he wrote to Rameshwar. Save yourself first. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think whatever you need to do to save yourself. There's another story. Whoa, that's a beautiful story. Mula Prakriti told this story. They were on a morning walk, and one devotee said to Prabhupada, we don't want to go back to Godhead. We just want to serve you like eternally. And Prabhupada pointed a cane at that devotee and said, don't you ever speak that way. Don't you ever just go back to Godhead in this lifetime. So Prabhupada was really, take
Yeah.
care of it. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, it makes sense. Obviously, in many ways, Prabhupada also took care of his health with his daily massage and so many things. And I just
Yeah.
see it over and over. If devotees aren't healthy physically or mentally,
Yeah.
yeah, they,
I think one of the biggest problems health-wise is devotees are allowing themselves to be in extremely stressful situations that may be more than they can handle. So, they're taking all the vitamins and doing all the exercise, and they go to the doctor and they go, hey, you've got this disease. It's like, how is that possible? Isn't it?
yeah,
Sometimes. Yeah. So I
yeah,
think that's really important. And also, how healthy it is to have good relationships and
mhm,
how unhealthy it is to keep everything inside. You don't have anybody to talk to, and then you hold it in, and it just eats you away. And there's a lot of research on that, toxic emotion. So I think that's important also.
yeah, yeah. So as a temple president, I see so many devotees, both who live in the temple and outside, that just struggle on so many levels and different times of their life. Yeah, it 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 calls for just being able to hold space for them as they go through and process
Yeah.
uh, their
Yeah.
life. And then the other thing I wanted to share was that I have lately felt the Maha Mantra as a very healing mantra. And I personally feel really often very just held and healed by
Yes, we all do.
it.
But you came to ISKCON fairly healed already. Ananda was
Because you were in my life at the very beginning. So I had a lot of really solid devotees.
well, I knew what was going on in the ashram because I was married to the ashram leader. You were the one that everybody liked, so that's why I can say that. But yeah, my realization of this is what, people say, can it solve this problem? And say, well, maybe if you chant Shuddhanam it can, but when's that going to happen? And then you have to carry that problem with you the rest of your life. So I always,
I agree. I've seen devotees and worked with devotees who, and I don't know if it's, I also think the mantra brings stuff up, right? The
yeah,
process
of
brings
course.
stuff up. And so then there may be at different times of their life, but we don't have, where I am, or just in general, just like, yeah, that's great, that's happening. And here's where you can talk about it. Here's how
Yeah.
you can expect this to happen. Or, yeah, you're just being really human-like right now. And that's great, because so many ways that we know we need to set up places where, yeah, we can just receive what they're going through and then
Well,
actually help them
Well,
go.
something that I deal with a lot, and I've given classes on, and in my self-acceptance workshop, we're going to deal with this a lot. It's just, it's just the reality that when people come, they're given a goal that's beyond their reach, which they think they're going to get in 1 or 2 or 3 years. Someone just wrote me, and he said he's got an addiction to pornography, and he's overcome through a 12-step program, but he has these other problems. He says his false ego is still big. And he's like, I'm losing faith in Krishna consciousness because I thought it would cure my false ego. I'm like, yeah, like doesn't happen in 3 years, So we have, I'm going to cure my
Yep.
false ego in 3 years. So many people are coming with their eyes on Mount Everest, and after a few years, they realize they're still pretty much in the ocean. And it's really hard on them. And just to be able to know that's going to happen and guide people beforehand is a great service, I think.
Yeah. We need to have a what to expect when
Yeah.
you're expecting
Yeah.
in Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. You're going to write the book? Somebody want to write the book?
Well,
Punishri.
I want before I go there, just to a note of encouragement. Last night we were up at midnight here in Australia, graduating a group of 15, 17 Karuna Care folks who have been for 7 months working on digging around in their stuff, and they're in different parts of the world. And of course, our next phase is creating some of these groups, because now we have 10 different languages and a Get Help button. So I just want to lift up that the Karuna Care .iscon.org is very active. You can learn. We will restart in September repeats of the intro courses. You're welcome to jump in and learn some of these things. And if you really have a passion for becoming involved, you can enroll in the practicum. And we're gradually translating into Russian and Hungarian and that kind of thing.
Fantastic.
So just to give some hope, there are spaces, and the more people are educated, and we're going to have a group facilitation course in October for those who finish their practicing, so they can have in their own temples, their own groups, and gradually people learn this skill, how to create heart connecting communities. And my vision is that every temple has a space where people, it's part of our Sangha. When you think of Rupa Goswami's 6 loving exchanges, it's got to have a place. You can't just do that in the back of a prasadam line, revealing the heart. That's not the place. It has to be a container, and it has to be facilitated by someone who knows what they're doing. So it's coming. I'm working on it, and
Thank you.
just encourage anybody who is interested to please jump in, get involved. It's really exciting. Well, the feedback we got last night, everybody's grieving. We're all grieving because the class is over, and so now we start a new thing, because everybody wants to keep going, and that's so exciting to hear. Anyway, that's my plug, and I'll put in the chat for those of you who don't know the website. I'll put it on there. Go ahead, Pranishri.
I just wanted to speak to what Ananda was saying about health. And I just want to share something my Guru Maharaj shared with us, Japa Swami, that one time when he was working in Mayapur, help building the Mayapur temple, he stepped on a nail and hurt his foot, and I don't think he was taking care of it. Something was going on. So Prabhupada learned about this, and he actually wrote him a letter, and I don't know exactly, but something to the effect that you need to take care of this body. It belongs to Krishna now. So I think that addresses that fact that we do have to take care of our health. And that's noted, there's that, him saying that. So I think the fact that whatever, we can't do sadhana without our body healthy. And as he says, it belongs to Krishna now anyway. So I just wanted to.
I could tell a story about that. Well, I was in a class in Los Angeles, and several devotees were coughing, and Prabhupada stopped the class, and he turned to the temple president. He said, "Why are they coughing? Don't they have warm clothes?" He said, "You should make sure they have warm clothes." And then Prabhupada told the story of Sanatan. What did he told? I forget what story. Maybe it was Sanatan. I forget. it's some way. Oh yeah, he told the story of Sanatan who wanted to kill himself. And then Mahaprabhu said, well, you can't kill yourself because your body belongs to me, so you have to take care of it. So then Prabhupada said, we have to take care of our bodies, obviously, for service of Krishna. And then he said something which kind of balances this out. He said, some care should be taken, because in those days, when some new health fad would come, like all the devotees all over ISKCON would do it. Now we're just like drinking lemon water with cayenne and maple syrup for, 10 days, and, people are sleeping on Sankirtan. So I think Prabhupada was a little concerned that we would go off, the pendulum would go off the other end. So he said some care, but I think it's obvious. And then there's one thing I wanted to mention before anyone else wants to share, which I think is important, and we can share this with others. Several times when Prabhupada would give lectures, he would break down and cry out of affection for his Guru Maharaj. And we know that sometimes he would describe his household life, what he was doing, how he was attached, or how he went to the movies with his son. Could you imagine if I gave a lecture and I was talking about how I went to the movies with my daughter, what some people might say? He's a guru, he's going to the movies with his daughter. And then Prabhupada said, we all know when Prabhupada said he had the dream about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and taking sannyas, and Prabhupada said, I was horrified. That's really being vulnerable. He's the Acharya of ISKCON, the founder Acharya, the liberated soul, and he's saying, I was horrified that I had to take sannyas. I mean, think about that. I don't think a lot of devotees notice that, because our culture is very much not to say those things. And Prabhupada said them all the time publicly. And I think we need to talk about that, share that more with devotees and say, look, vulnerability is the process. Vulnerability is a synonym for humility. We're not trying to hide anything. And the people who are the most vulnerable and honest and willing to admit their mistakes are the most loved and the most respected. By far, it's easy to hide everything, but to be vulnerable enough to admit your mistake, it's such a respectable act. So I think we should share this with devotees, because we need more of this. So Uttama's here, and I just have this feeling, Uttama, you're going to tell us something that we need to hear. Is that true?
I guess with your prodding and blessings, it could happen.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Let us hear it.
I was just really, appreciating your last point about the vulnerability. And I was also just appreciating the affirmation that, when you need trauma, when you have trauma, it's not an offense against the holy name to go and get that fixed. In fact, when you think about it, how can you possibly chant Sudanam if you have those anartas? So just to get rid of those anartas is part of the process. Duh.
Yeah, definitely, duh. It's right in Chaitanya Charitamrita, pull out the weeds.
Right. So just confirming.
Yeah, one time Nagaraj gave a class and he said, so you think everything will happen by the process of bhakti, so you don't have to work on it. So what if we apply that analogy to bathing? Well, I haven't bathed in 3 years. Why? Well, when I become a pure devotee, I'll naturally bathe. Okay, sounds pretty insane. I'll control my anger when I'm a pure devotee. Until then, I'll offend everybody. Doesn't make sense. Yeah. Brajalila, thank you, Uttama.
Well, thank you, Uttama, Prabhu. Yes, I wanted to just lift up, as Rambaru just did with Karuna Care, I wanted to lift up hearts. Because, hearts is such an important little body that's coming up, that's sprouting from this root of Karuna Care. Actually, this came from Ananda Vrindavan's son. When a year ago, I believe it was a year ago, the North American leadership, he brought this 3.0 concept from appreciative inquiry. And from that, there blossomed this hearts with people like Mahatma Prabhu and so many others that are involved. And this group is dedicated to bringing emotional mental care to the devotees. So thank you so very much.
Tell
And I-
what it stands for. Vrajolita, what is HEARTS as an acronym for what?
Yeah.
Who knows?
This is,
Holistic,
yeah, holistic.
Emo-
You can please go ahead.
Emotional.
Emotional.
awareness, relational training and support. That's
Yeah.
what HEART.
Holistic,
Okay.
emotional,
Okay.
relational, everything that we've missed for 40 years.
Okay, so I have to make an announcement also because a lot of devotees don't know this, but I'm in a group called Sabha, and Sabha is a group that reviews GBC resolutions and gives feedback to GBC, and we all got inspired to form subcommittees to discuss issues that we felt were important. So we formed a subcommittee, and one of the devotees on the subcommittee works for the city of Cape Town, and she started describing their PR department and how any employee that has any problem can go to this department, even if they have our own financial problems or emotional problems. It doesn't have to be interpersonal problems. And we started discussing, could we have such a thing? We called it the devotee wellness. Could we have such a thing in ISKCON? So we're finalizing that, and we're going to run a few pilot projects in different temples so that there'll be a go-to person, and anyone in that temple or that zone, any problem they have, they will go to this go-to person who will then either take care of them or direct them to the proper person who can deal with their issue. And I think, Rambaru, you were saying that when you allow these kinds of things to happen, it kind of opens Pandora's box. And I'm sure we're going to see that because there's if you give people a chance to speak and they feel secure, we're going to see a lot. And it's going to help us, it's going to educate us, and it's going to educate the leaders and go, this is what's actually going on behind the scenes, because everyone was afraid to tell you because you tell them they're in Maya or something. Right? So we've been working on it like almost a year, but we're plugging away.
Nanda.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Nanda.
I would love to be part of that. And just from a leadership management side, sometimes we just really don't know how to deal with it when people are going through things, and
Well,
there's fear, and either fear of saying or doing the wrong thing or saying nothing. So I think more of these trained Karuna care representatives in temples where you really can connect devotees in need. And I've seen that happen here in DC with Rambaru and others, and that people really have come to the other side. So that's really encouraging. Also, I wanted to just go back a second to Prabhupada expressing his vulnerability. And it always struck me when he got to New York, maybe he was still in Boston, but he wrote, how are these people ever going to understand Bhagavatam?
Yeah.
It was just an expression of so much. And I know sometimes devotees just say, almost like to dismiss that. No, Prabhupada's a pure devotee. He couldn't have felt that way, or he couldn't have really suffered those heart attacks, right? But you take away then that his extraordinary achievements and his extraordinary just devotion by not acknowledging and kind of honoring his genuine feelings of inadequacy at that moment.
Wow, and compassion.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Well, Vaneshri, you wanna? We're running out of steam now. So
Yeah, just one quick comment also. I'm also was part of the NA North America ISKCON 3.0, and we are also in the process of working on a mentoring program, which we want to establish train mentors, hopefully hook up with Rambaru and get some of that training in there too, so that they can. We'd like to present that to the temple, so that, because we do need counselors and we do need guides and we do need mentors who know how to speak to people who need to work through their own trauma before they can actually be these mentors. So that's also in the works too. So I think there's a lot of good things coming out of that ISKCON 3.0. Really excited about it. And how
It's-
there's a lot of people on the same page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. I think there's a leadership, just to give you, I'll be following up with all these 3.0 initiatives. 'Cause I think there's a leadership conference coming up at the end of September, and they're asking that all of you come back on again, and we continue to try to see how can we get that down to temple levels. Yeah, keep it moving forward. So
Thank you.
keep an eye out for me.
Yes, and one final note, this was the final of the 6-month series. The Hearts have been doing a monthly presentation on a topic that is relevant to emotional awareness and relationship. And we're getting ready to schedule the fall and beyond. And it would be really helpful if you could, before we finish, type in the chat any topics you'd like us to address. We are going to call it what every leader absolutely needs to know about : and we've got a whole ton of stuff already. But if you have any things that you feel like it would be relevant for you to hear about, that you'd like us to talk about, one of us on Hearts, throw it in the chat, and then we can get your insights and talk to you and other people who have that interest in our future series that are coming up soon. So I'd appreciate that. Just throw it in the chat, a topic that is dear to your heart. Maybe we've already done it. You want to have more of it. We've talked about trauma, compassionate listening, grief, other stuff. Yeah. So
Are all of these available?
they are recorded. And if you go to the Karuna Care website, we have now a tab called Hearts. So
Okay.
all of these presentations have been put on the Hearts tab on the
I see it.
Karuna.
Yeah, great.
All right.
Thank you.
And we're also, one other thing, since we're all making announcements, we have a site called Bhakti Support, but we're transferring it to an app. So on that app, we have our sexual purity course, our forgiveness course. We have a course on vows. We're going to put up this incredible self-esteem course that's being created by two of my disciples. They're both psychologists. One of them is here. You see where it says Gokora Priya Sattva Life. She was already teaching this before she was a devotee. And we'll have an elaborate Japa course. And there'll be more courses coming up. So we're excited about that. So that's a nice resource.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mahatma, for joining us. And
My pleasure.
we look forward to seeing all of you somewhere in another course event somewhere. If you need any help and you know someone who needs help, they can go to Karuna Care at the Get Help button and go inside. They can either talk with one of our Karuna Care chaplains, or we have now an inside button with counselors and therapists that are licensed, credentials, trained, and they are also ISKCON devotees. And on the Bhaktivedanta Medical Association BMA.healthcare, we now have two mental health on top of 165 other healthcare professionals, Ayurvedic doctors that are ISKCON devotees, professionals that you can reach out to for consultation. It's pretty free. I have several times reached out to various psychiatrists to get help for different devotees. It has been amazing. When my son was diagnosed with cancer, they were incredibly on it and helpful. And so I just say, if you know anyone or you're having a struggle, these are two resources you can immediately use and get pretty quick help. So just want to say that. And thank you so much. So we're going to sign off now. And Hare Krishna. I'm going to stop the recording. Yeah.